Hello, my name is Gachram, Environmental Sustainability Intern for Central Community College. Welcome and thank you all for attending today's Building Series. The Building Series is designed as specialized workshops for educators within the building, design, and construction industries. However, the information provided today is for anyone who is interested in sustainable practices. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please submit them in the chat box, which is located on the upper right-hand corner titled Chat. If you are in the Hastings Campus Live view, you have the choice of using the microphone or the chat box. Also, as a reminder, CCC faculty and staff should register for the EMPD sessions for this event during or after the presentation. If you have any questions, please contact Corey Cheddock. With that being said, allow me to introduce today's Sustainability Leadership Workshop presenter, Marshall Fisher. Though a native Nebraskan, Marshall earned his bachelor's degree in environmental studies from Western State Colorado University. He has moved back to Grand Island and is the Sustainability and Climate Action Planning Assistant in the Environmental Sustainability Office at Central Community College. Marshall has assisted in improving the recycling program for all Central Community College sites. Marshall is a WasteCap Resource Solutions accredited professional in construction and demolition debris recycling. Along with recycling, Marshall is also passionate about sustainable buildings, local agriculture, and learning about and experiencing the natural world. Without further ado, please welcome Marshall Fisher.
Thank you, Gotch, for that introduction. I appreciate it. Let me just get set up here. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to be here today. Again, my name is Marshall Fisher. This is a presentation on construction and demolition waste management, improving environmental practices, and is a part of the Sustainability Leadership Workshop Series. So again, I thank you for taking the time out of your afternoon to be here. This is going to be a pretty quick presentation. I have about 45 minutes of material to go over, and we'll leave some time at the end for questions. So this is a presentation, kind of a summary of what I learned from a construction and demolition debris reuse and recycling training that I did late last year. This is a pretty condensed version of the training that I did. The training that I took part in was 8 hours over a 2-day period. So this is pretty condensed, and we'll move through the material pretty quickly. So if there are any questions, please save them to the end, and I would be happy to work with anybody who has questions or needs clarification after the presentation for getting you any of the information or resources that you might need. The training was put on an organization called WasteCap Resource Solutions, and they provide waste reduction and recycling education and accreditation and some consulting services to businesses primarily in the construction and demolition industry. And it was sponsored by an organization called WasteCap Nebraska, who provides education and training and some services to businesses across Nebraska who are looking to reduce their waste primarily, but also on improving sustainability practices. These are both great organizations. I'll say that I've always, as Gotch mentioned, been fascinated by the green building industry. But before I took part in this training last year, I was pretty unaware of the role that construction and demolition waste management plays, both in the green building industry itself, but also in overall environmental impact. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And the training really helped me realize that as businesses and organizations are starting to make, and industries are starting to make environmental commitments, this idea of construction and demolition waste management is just going to continue to grow in popularity and frequency within the construction industry. So CCC students who have an understanding of how a construction waste management program works, and even more importantly, how to implement one, really will have, I think, a tremendous advantage in the job market and in the construction and demolition industry. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. This is today's framework. We're going to start off by talking about what is construction and demolition waste, what is it and why is it important, and spend a little bit of time talking about what today's drivers or incentives are for establishing these programs. And then we're going to go over WasteCap Resource Solutions 10 steps for setting up a construction and demolition waste management and recycling program. And then we'll finish it off with some questions at the end. What is construction waste and where is it coming from? The beginning of our training really focused on this, and this is pretty straightforward, especially for you folks in the industry. But just so we're all on the same page and are talking about the same thing, the training defined construction and demolition waste is any waste that's generated from the construction, renovation, demolition of buildings, roads, and other infrastructure. And that's pretty straightforward. Materials we're talking about here include wood, asphalt, drywall, masonry, metals, earth, shingles, insulation, plastics, paper, and cardboard. Again, those are all materials that are common to the construction and demolition industries, and those are the materials that we primarily see disposed of as a result of construction and demolition projects. So this is an image of a dumpster that is pretty traditional with what we see in most construction and demolition projects. This is how waste has traditionally been handled at these sites. You can see it's a consolidated mix of all sorts of different materials. There's wood, there's metals, there's furniture, there's some electronics in that fan, and is a pretty good example of what construction and demolition waste management and recycling programs are looking to address. They're looking to single out some of these materials, some of the materials that have market or commodity values, some materials that can be reused, and dealing with them in a more environmental and both economic and better terms for the environment and for the economy. So this is a good example of how waste has traditionally been treated and something that I think that we're going to start seeing change in the future. I adapted this slide from WasteCap Resource Solutions digital toolkit, which they provided in the training. And this is a table of common components of construction and demolition waste. I modified it a little bit. I tried to focus on materials that most people are familiar with. But if you're interested, I could get you the whole list, which is more inclusive and features a lot more materials. But this is, again, yeah, just so we're all talking about the same kinds of materials here. Asphalt, wood, plastics, metal, masonry, and then a whole slew of miscellaneous materials are common to construction and demolition waste. You can see under some of these materials, for example, the lead, under the metal and the mercury, some of these materials are pretty nasty for the environment. So programs that are working to reduce or eliminate these materials is beneficial for a number of reasons. Why is construction and demolition waste management and recycling important? So the intent of these programs, these C&D waste management programs, is basically the same as any other traditional municipal waste management or recycling program. And that is basically to divert valuable natural resources from the landfill and from incinerators for a variety of both environmental and economic reasons. On the environmental side, environmental drivers of these programs include keeping valuable resources out of the landfill. That's good for the environment because it decreases greenhouse gas emissions, helps to conserve landfill space, it saves these resources for future generations, etc. We'll go into the environmental benefits of these programs in a little more detail. There's also a number of economic incentives that drive construction and demolition waste management programs. These include the possibility for these programs to reduce project cost, to provide the project revenue through materials that have market value, and also recycling and waste management of these materials can create and stimulate the recycling industry. It can help create jobs in the recycling industry and helps keep money localized within communities. So those are some environmental and economic incentives or drivers for these programs. But there also are a number of other drivers, and we'll get into those as well in a little more detail. So for environmental impacts, one thing that was really eye-opening to me was in the training that I took part in was the amount of waste that is generated from the construction and demolition industries. It generates an enormous amount of solid waste, and all of this waste does have impacts on the environment, which is a major concern and driver for these programs. So a study done by the EPA in 2003 estimated that the U.S. generated 170 million tons of building-related construction and demolition material. So that's 1 year, 2003, they did an estimate. And it found that, it estimated, I guess, that 52% of this material, or 88 million tons, was landfilled. And we touched a little bit on the environmental impacts of that. But to be a little more regional, I thought that this was pretty pertinent. I found a study that was done by the Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality. It was done in 2010, and this study was pretty comprehensive. It audited 8 landfills across the state, and it audited the material streams that were coming into the landfills for over the course of a year. So they got a pretty comprehensive look at what kinds of materials were ending up in Nebraska's landfills. So it was a really pretty interesting study, and that study done by the Nebraska Department found that in more than 75% of all landfill loads that were going to Nebraska landfills, they contained some level of construction and demolition related material. And that study classified those materials as lumber, drywall, plumbing fixtures, electrical cable, siding, shingles, PVC pipe, carpet, doors, windows, and linoleum. So you can see that is a pretty significant, in pretty significant frequency, these materials are ending up in Nebraska landfills. In Nebraska, we tend to not, it's not on the forefront of our minds that landfill space is a critical resource, but in some areas, in some cities, some states, these landfills are becoming overburdened and are running out of viable space. So the idea that in 75% of loads, them receiving construction material is a big deal. Nebraska hasn't felt those pressures yet, but it's still important to consider that. Again, all of this waste has a lot of environmental impacts. Some of the stuff that's generated in construction and demolition is pretty toxic stuff, hazardous for water, for soils. And a lot of these materials are also really valuable resources, and having them end up in the landfill creates the need to generate more materials. It's kind of it's a wasteful practice. So when projects can reduce the amount of materials they're sent into the landfill, we can save a pretty significant amount of energy, and we can save these valuable resources. And also when materials are recycled, it decreases the amount of energy it takes to create new products. It decreases the amount of raw materials that are required for them. And it does help save on the transportation and distribution of these materials as well. So a lot of environmental impacts with construction and demolition, and it is a major driver for implementing these projects across the country. This table, is from that study that was done by the EPA, and it is estimated amounts of construction and demolition material by source. It breaks it up, you can see, between residential and non-residential sources. You can see by looking at the graph that they're not too far off, actually. In total, residential sources contributed about 67 million tons of material. Non-residential sources, 103 million tons. And looking over there at the right, under the totals, you can see that demolition at 84 million tons was the most significant generator of construction and demolition waste, and that makes sense considering all the material that is generated in those projects. Okay, economic drivers for construction and demolition waste management programs. The training really spent some time talking about the economic drivers of construction and demolition waste management. And they talked a lot about how in recent years the economics for these programs has really become quite a bit better. There's much higher demand these days, both nationally and internationally, for raw materials, for goods, and this demand is driving up the price for recycled goods and has really helped the economics. So again, yeah, the many materials in a dumpster from a construction project are commodities. They are valuable raw materials, and they can be reused or recycled for new products. That's helped drive the industry a little bit. And there's also a demand now for these projects because landfill tipping fees are continuing to rise, and as landfills run out of space, as they start to control more of the materials that come into them, it's becoming more expensive for projects to dump their material into the landfill. And so when projects work to eliminate unnecessary waste, or they can reduce their waste by recycling a percentage, it can reduce overall disposal costs, which is also a significant economic incentive for these programs. And recycling programs increase economic activity in recycling industries. This is kind of a downstream, if you will, effect of these programs. It can stimulate economic infrastructure development. It can create jobs by increasing demand for workers in the industry. So that's also a benefit of improving construction waste management. So we talked about the environmental drivers and the economic drivers. There are also several other drivers we'll talk about, but this is an example of basically construction and demolition recycling economics 101. It's a pretty simplified example of what a project can do with these programs, but it helps demonstrate the point. And the training went into quite a bit of detail on calculating some of the economic benefits of construction, recycling, and management, waste management. But this example, I think, helps demonstrate what the incentives are. So project A, no recycling, they generate 1,000 tons of waste. It all goes to the landfill. There's a $30 per ton landfill tipping fee. Do the math, $30,000 to dispose of that project's waste. Project B, it's the same project, but this project reaches a goal of 50% waste recycling. So they generate the same 1,000 tons of waste. 500 tons is recycled, 500 tons is landfilled. Same landfill tipping fee at $30. This Project B's overall cost is $15,000 to dispose of their waste. The difference is a savings of $15,000. Again, this is kind of simplified, but it does demonstrate how recycling can reduce the landfill waste, and when tipping fees matter, it can save a project on cost. A lot of times, WasteCap communicated that with marketable materials, the tipping fees would be waived. So for the 500 tons in Project B that were generated, if they're marketable materials, they could either eliminate those materials at no cost, there would be no tipping fee, or some of those materials could even generate supplemental revenue for the project. So again, this is taken from the WasteCap Resource Solutions digital toolkit. There are other drivers that are helping push the industry and helping construction and demolition waste management become more popular with projects, and there's a couple different ones that the training talked about. And the first one I thought was really great timing, that 2 weeks ago we had Lane Burt talk about the green building industry and kind of specifically LEED in the Living Building Challenge. The training that I did also mentioned how the green building industry and the quest for buildings to meet certain environmental certifications has really driven the popularity of these waste management programs. So just like Lane talked about, sustainable building or green certifications, specifically LEED, do grant points for waste management, and LEED, for example, generates, I think Lane touched on this, but LEED grants 1 point for 50% waste reduction. They grant 2 points for 75% or more diversion, and they grant an additional 1 point, which they call an innovation point, for 95% waste diversion or more. And in the green building industry, where buildings are chasing pretty tough standards, every point counts. So if a project is working towards a certification, it definitely makes sense for the project to focus on waste management strategies and earn every point that they can by improving their waste management and lessening their diversion. Another driver is requirement. States, cities, and project owners all over the country are requiring that recycling be a part of construction and demolition projects. States and cities have ordinances that mandate minimum recycling amounts, and project owners are seeing this as a way for them to do the right thing, if you will, or they see some benefit either economically or promotionally for their project to use recycling. So that's driven the industry, and also that C&D waste management can be a bid advantage, and the training went into this in a little bit of detail about, and it makes sense if two contractors are bidding a job and they're coming in at just about the same price for their services, but one contractor offers recycling, the other doesn't. A lot of project owners, I think, are gonna choose the contractor who offers recycling for the same reasons we've gone over. They have environmental concerns. They're interested in the economics of it. They're going after a LEED building certification, etc. So it can help contractors be more competitive, and it can help the bid process for those who offer it. Another driver is ease. This is a new thing for a lot of folks in the construction and demolition industries, but as more and more projects and programs implement some of these strategies, they're finding that when it's done right, one, it's not very hard, and it can even help improve the efficiency of a project. If it's done right, materials move off of the job site just as easy as they move on, which is a change for some, and it can lessen day-to-day cleanup tasks, and it can even make some job sites safer. So ease is another driver. People are seeing that this isn't that hard. Another one is positive public image. I think that this is a big one. Construction waste management is a really visible way for projects to show leadership, and we're seeing this a lot these days, that industries and companies are making public environmental commitments, and they know that if they're always looking for ways to portray their environmental responsibility. So this stuff matters to younger generations. They care about who they support. They're comfortable with environmental issues, and they want to see the companies that they work for and the companies that they support make and meet environmental commitments. And projects that implement some of these strategies, they see it as a great way as a great opportunity to receive local and statewide, national publicity and press for the work that they're doing. So those are some of the main drivers for the increase that we're seeing in construction and demolition waste management. We're going to kind of shift gears here and talk quickly about the 3 R's of construction waste management. These are the same 3 R's as you see in traditional recycling, and that is reduce, reuse, recycle. And the arrow is on the left there, kind of indicating that's the way we should move through the process. Projects should first work to reduce the amount of waste that they're generating, reduce inefficiencies, reduce energy, all of those things, because that has the most environmental impact. By reducing it in the first place, we're eliminating that waste overall. And reduction strategies should really be included throughout the design and planning phase of any construction and demolition project. Moving down, the materials that we can't reduce, we need to focus on reusing. Materials that are salvaged, basically reused from these work sites, can be sold, they can be donated, they can be stored and used later, or they can be reused on the current project. Again, all of these strategies, the 3 R's have both environmental and economic benefits. And so the materials we can't reduce, we can't reuse, we need to focus on recycling. WasteCap Resource Solutions talked a lot about the materials that they target for waste reduction and recycling, and they identified 5 materials that they go after no matter what, and those are wood, metal, cardboard, concrete, which is both brick and masonry material, and drywall. And they target these in all of the projects that they work on. They found that these materials have market value. They're easily separated from other materials. They're easily hauled. They're easily sold at market. So these are and they're generated in materials that justify their separation. They're generated in levels, in frequency, if you will, to justify their separation. So those are the materials they always go after. Depending on the project, they might identify other materials that are worth going after, but on every project they work to recycle wood, metal, cardboard, concrete, and drywall. This is an image of construction and demolition waste management and recycling in practice. You can see this is a pile on probably a demolition site of metals. It's been separated, it's been sorted to some extent, and this is a good example of what these projects are looking to do. This material is not going to end up in the landfill. It is not going to be charged a landfill tipping fee probably. It's going to be recycled, and there's a good chance that whoever is accepting this material is either going to waive the tipping fee, or this material could generate some supplemental revenue for the project. So it's kind of a win-win there. It's a better example than what we saw before, and is the direction I think the industry is moving. Okay, we're going to shift gears here a little bit and talk about WasteCap's 10 steps to establishing a construction and demolition waste management program. They went through each one of these 10 steps in pretty good detail. I'm just going to touch on each one of them today. I'd be happy to pass on literature on that has more detail about them, but we'll go through them in order. They found that these are the 10 steps to establishing a successful program, and it's great to have the 10 steps, because if you follow them, I think that it does kind of lay the framework for how to set up one of these programs. So we'll go through each one of these in a little bit of detail. Step 1 is commit, and this is the first step to a successful program, and it's important to include this planning, this commitment from the very beginning of a project, and that means including reduce, reuse, recycle, the 3R planning from the start. That takes any of the confusion out of it. It's the designers know about it, the contractors know about it. Everybody's on the same page. WasteCap suggests you put these waste management strategies into all specs and all contracts, and in this commit phase, you would select somebody that has project authority. That could be an owner, a contract manager, a site superintendent. Any of these folks who have authority, they're going to be the ones who are in charge of the project and who are responsible for controlling where the materials go. And then if you select a program coordinator, they would work directly with that other person to coordinate, to implement, to educate, all of those things. So again, step 1, commit from the beginning. Everybody knows that this is the direction that the project is taking. Step 2, identify target materials. This is for both reuse and recycling. These are the things to think about when identifying target materials. Again, WasteCap always goes after wood, metal, cardboard, and concrete, but some projects might be different, and we need to identify what materials we're going after. And that means identifying or understanding what materials are going to be generated in large enough quantities to justify their separation. 1. 2, identifying of those materials what can be separated. When we figure out what we're separating and what their quantities are going to be, we're then able to decide where dumpsters are going to be placed, when and where they come on the project, and that's an important step for that. It's also important when identifying target materials to look for materials that have existing markets, recycling markets, but also to push to find new markets if some don't exist. If you have a material in a large quantity and you can't find a market, it is worth investigating more and pushing recycling vendors to maybe accept what you're generating. And in this phase, you would also ensure the project's compliance with hazardous waste regulations. So step 2 is identify target materials. That helps us move directly into step 3, which is selecting markets and haulers. This involves some additional consideration. So we understand what materials we're going to be going after. We're going to figure out where these materials are going to go, what markets they're going to go to, and who's going to haul. we have to understand what's going to happen to these materials once they're taken off the job site, who's going to handle them, develop a vendor list. As we develop a vendor list for these materials, we need to ask what kind of materials do they accept, what's going to happen to them once they receive them, are they actually going to be recycled or not. And then another important piece is to ask for documentation. This comes in a little bit later as we're doing some monitoring and proving basically that these materials are being recycled and diverted. We need documentation to prove that. And this is also an important piece to this is if we're separating materials, we can then bid accordingly. We can bid different vendors for each material. We don't have to have the concrete hauler take the cardboard. We can have different vendors for each one of those materials and hopefully get the best price for each material that's being separated. Step 4 is select the haulers. Okay, step 4 in the 10-step process is develop a waste management plan. This is required by LEED and I believe by some other green building certifications. This master plan lays out the framework for the waste management program. And what it's going to do is create a document where anybody with questions can go for reference. It outlines the recycling goals for the project. It's going to identify who's in charge, the chain of command. It's going to identify what materials were targeted or being targeted, identifies what materials are going to be recycled. It identifies the goals and the rules of the project, so those are explicit. Everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows the goals. Everybody knows the rules, and they understand what's going to happen if they don't follow the rules. It identifies the vendors who are going to be hauling the materials. It identifies where these materials are going to go and what happens to them afterwards. And it outlines the procedure on how the project is going to document, monitor, and enforce the recycling program. So the waste management plan is a really important step. It sets the framework for the whole program and takes any confusion out of the process and establishes the rules and the goals, etc. And it is required by LEED. If you were going after LEED points, they would need to see this plan before they would ever issue points. Step 5, site signs and logistics. So the first 4 steps that we talked about commit, we talked about identifying target materials, selecting the haulers, and then developing the waste management plan. Those 4 steps are all done before the project ever breaks ground, and those are all pre-planning requirements. Now, step 5, the project's off and running, and it's starting to generate materials. The project needs to know its site logistics. Basically, it needs to have identified how materials are going to be moved off of the project. WasteCap communicated the importance that's put in the in the construction industry on being super efficient at moving materials on to construction sites. Stuff is delivered typically on time, just when it's needed. It doesn't sit around for too long. That's good logistics in the construction industry, but these programs need to be just as efficient at moving materials off as they are at moving materials on. In this step, you determine where and when dumpsters are going to be placed at the job site. One thing that they really stressed in this section was that there needs to be a trash container or a trash dumpster next to all recycling containers. You can't have either a recycling or a trash container out on their own. They tend to get contaminated with materials if they're out on their own. all dumpsters, all equipment needs to have clear signage. Clear signage on dumpsters, on fences, on the carts, all of this to make it really easily communicated that this is where the materials go, and takes any of the confusion out of the process and really helps reduce or eliminate contamination within the dumpsters. So that's step 5. Oops, went backwards here. Step 6 is monitor progress. This is a really critical step because without monitoring, the project doesn't fully understand what's working and what is not. And monitoring is a critical step to the success of the project. And it's pretty straightforward for a lot of these programs. Recycling and trash dumpsters are, in order to be monitored, or visually inspected every day. All that means is somebody who's responsible for that task would go around and visually inspect the dumpsters, see what kind of contamination, if any, they're getting, and then be able to address those issues accordingly. So without monitoring, you're never going to know what's working and what's not, and will not be aware of any issues and will not be able to address them. So that's pretty straightforward, monitoring, visually inspecting the program every day. Education and training is step 7, also a really important step. Every contractor and every employee on the job site needs to be familiar with how the recycling and waste program works and need to be held accountable for knowing how it works. So education and training is done in all employee orientation programs, and education is everywhere throughout the project. It's in the handouts, it's on the dumpsters, in the signage, and it happens in personal instruction. WasteCap talked about how important it is to single out some job positions like crew foreman, site superintendent, some of those folks, and give them additional instruction, additional training, because those guys are the leaders on a program, on a project, and can basically communicate accordingly. So some positions are singled out to receive additional training, and education and training updates are discussed in every project meeting. Everybody's on the same page with where they are with the project goals, and are familiar with how the project's operating. Step 8, this is also required by LEED if a project is going after that certification, and that is document. WasteCap talked a lot about this step in particular because I have it in quotes there. If it didn't happen if it wasn't written down, and that, I believe, is the mentality that's taken by a lot of these green building certification organizations. You have to be able to prove the work that you're doing, and that's only done through documentation. And documentation comes from the haulers typically, and a project wants the haulers to provide monthly records of weight and volume for the materials that they're handling. You don't want to wait till the end of a project to try and scrape your documents together to track them down. If you establish in your waste management plan that you're going to receive monthly records, monthly documentation, it takes the guesswork out of it, and you have a physical document that proves you are diverting the materials you say you are. Step 9 is adjust. Most of the work in these programs is done before ground's ever broken. It's done in the planning phases. It's done with the design teams. But as the project gets off the ground and as materials are starting to be generated, things change, plans change, and adjustments need to be made. You need a recycling program needs to be flexible. It needs to be able to adapt to changing situations. So that's an important piece to these waste reduction and recycling programs, is being flexible, being able to adjust to change efficiently. Step 10 is celebrate success. We kind of talked about the incentives for public relations with these programs, and this kind of goes back to that. This is an opportunity for a program, for a project to celebrate the work that they've done. They can apply for community awards. These projects can receive press coverage, positive press coverage, and apply for industry and trade certificates. Again, all of these things go back to the positive PR that these programs can develop. And you got to tell people about the good that you're doing, and that's an important step to a successful program. So that's the 10 steps. I'm just going to go back to this slide real quick, and we can go through them one more time. Step 1 is commit. Step 2, identify target materials, select markets and haulers. Step 4, develop a waste management plan. Steps 1 through 4 all happen before ground's ever broken. 5, signs and site logistics. Again, making sure that direction is clear, signage is clear on all of the equipment. Monitor progress. Education and training. Again, everybody needs to be familiar with the project's goals, with the expectations. Step 8 is document. Make sure that we are recording and collecting data on the things we say we're doing. Step 9 is adjust, and step 10 is celebrate success. So those are WasteCap's Resource Solutions 10 steps to implementing a successful construction and demolition waste management program. This is a works cited page. Again, I'd be happy to pass along additional resources to anybody who's interested in learning more, has additional questions. I have a pretty good list of resources, so I'd be happy to pass those along. And I'd also like to acknowledge one more time the training's sponsor, which was WasteCap Nebraska. They helped provide the training series, and also WasteCap Resource Solutions. They provided a great training program, and I'd encourage anybody who's interested in it to check out both of these organizations more. They both do great things in terms of waste management, and are just good organizations.